6 suitcases hit my living room and the house flinched. I am 74 and a widow. That thump was the first time since Harold died that I felt my walls try to breathe. My son Leonard did not flinch. He dropped another suitcase while my daughter-in-law Amanda stood in the doorway with a smile you could iron shirts on and said I would take the downstairs den and that the bedrooms upstairs were theirs and that the movers would be here on Saturday. If this rings true, stay with me. Hit subscribe, tell me where you are watching from, and share this with someone who thinks age means surrender. Amanda pointed as if directing traffic. Pictures off the mantle. Coats off the hooks. The moving van is booked for Saturday. 4 days. She said it the way a hotel clerk slides a key across a counter. I looked at the suitcases and said all right in the gentle voice a matador uses while stepping aside. Power rarely arrives like thunder. Most days it is a whisper that sounds like a date and a time. 4 days. A den with a door someone else would like to control. I put the kettle on because whistling steadies hands. I poured Leonard a mug because a mother does not forget the script that raised her son even when he forgets his lines. This is temporary, he said, painting kindness over a wall that did not ask for it. Temporary, I answered, and smiled at the kettle. Who is paying the movers? We are, Amanda said. I put down a deposit. We can split it. Who does the contract list? Me, she said. Oak Ridge Assisted Living has a studio open near the interstate and we will drive you to church on Sundays. 2 sentences tried to lift my life out of its frame. I wrote Oak Ridge on the pad by the phone. I wrote deposit under Amanda. I wrote Saturday and I wrote 4 days. Then I asked Leonard to bring up the winter blankets so I could sort linens. He clattered down the steps, grateful for a job with handles. Amanda tapped the glass over Harold in his navy blues and said clutter is a tripping hazard. Martha, she added, and the name landed like a coin that missed its jar. Harold used to say lines hold houses up. He meant beams and he meant rules. I led Amanda to the den and gave a tour like a realtor with no audience. 2 windows. A door that locks with a key I keep on a ring. Shelf for my Bible. Space for my sewing machine. She smiled without using her eyes. When Leonard returned with the tote I thanked him the way a mother thanks even when her heart is taking notes. You always were strong, I said. By late afternoon the house behaved like a small factory. Tape guns ripped the air. Tissue paper sighed around wedding china. Cardboard slid across the floor. I wrote while I wrapped because paper helps. Date. Time. Who said what? What each box held. The number on the magnet stuck to Amanda's phone case. The way her thumbnail tapped the screen. At dusk my granddaughter Emily knocked. 16. Clever. Loyal. She saw the suitcases and tried not to let her face be a movie, then failed and wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Grandma, she whispered, Mom says you are going to Oak Ridge. We are trying it out, I said, like a dress you can return if it scratches. She pulled me to the back porch and we sat while a train moaned far off and the hydrangeas glowed. They talked about papers, she said. Something for you to sign. A power of attorney. I squeezed her hand and gave her the sentence I keep like a peppermint. Boring is harder to argue with. Then we will not argue. We will organize. After she left I dialed Oak Ridge. A woman named Kelsey answered with a voice like an automated door. I asked about the deposit. Non-refundable after Friday at 5, she said, and it sits in Amanda's name. I asked her to email me any admissions forms and I spelled my address slowly until I could hear my own voice steady. Saturday, they said. 4 days. I placed the phone on its cradle and let the house hear me breathe. 4 days is not a sentence. It is a field. You can plant a lot in a small field if you know where the sun lands and how to turn the soil with your heel. I walked the rooms like a captain after weather, touching everything that still floated. In the kitchen I set out my pill organizer and checked the labels without squinting. In the dining room I opened my sewing machine and left a hem half-finished so my life could be seen doing its own work. In the hall I pinned my church schedule to the corkboard and taped an emergency contacts list to the fridge. I sharpened 2 pencils and slid a fresh notebook beside the phone. I opened the window and the house breathed with me. The house hummed. Leonard carried boxes as if carrying them could keep his marriage upright. Amanda typed messages that moved across her face like weather. After dishes, Leonard stood with his hands in his pockets and tried on the word sorry. He wore it badly and I forgave him anyway. When the dark finally settled, I wrote a small prayer on the back of a grocery list and tucked it into the old recipe tin Ruth gave me when we retired from teaching. Keep my mind sharp. Keep my hands steady. Keep my mouth kind. I slept with the phone on the nightstand and the notebook under it. Morning would bring visitors and sentences that think they are laws. I would keep my voice quiet. I would keep my pen busy. I would gather straight lines the way a choir gathers breath before a long note, then I would let that note carry through the whole house until even the suitcases remembered who owns the floor beneath them. Morning came in soft and honest. I baked cinnamon rolls from a can because sweet things tame sharp rooms and brewed coffee until the kitchen smelled like the Bluebird Diner back when Harold would order chicken fried steak and wink at me across the booth. I had just set plates on the counter when a white sedan parked where the mail truck usually pauses. A man in a navy suit stepped out with a leather folder hugged to his ribs the way people carry good news they want to turn into fact. "I am Dan," he said with a smile that belonged on a billboard. "Family attorney. Here to make life easier." He shook Leonard's hand too long and nodded at Amanda as if he were reporting to a supervisor. Then he looked at me the way salesmen look at someone who keeps pantry shelves alphabetized. "We have a few standard forms," he said, already opening the folder. "A durable power. A health proxy. These streamline decisions. Nothing changes for you. We are just simplifying. Words can be velvet on the outside and sand on the inside." He slid the papers over the counter like cards in a friendly game that never ends friendly. I put on my red reading glasses and took the pen he offered because pens love to be held even when they are about to disappoint someone. "I read before I sign," I said, "and my attorney fusses if I do not let her fuss. I will email her now." Dan kept smiling, but the muscles behind the smile stepped away. "Of course," he said. "Perfectly reasonable. We can witness and notarize right here." He tapped the last page with a manicured finger. "Easy. Paper cuts are easy. They still bleed." I lifted the first sheet and the second and the third. Powers too wide. Language that made Amanda the gate through which my money would walk. Witness lines already printed with familiar names waiting to be filled by convenient hands. The kind of document that invites regret to move in and label the dresser drawers. "I will not sign today," I said. "I will send copies to Ruth. She taught second grade with me before she decided to trade bulletin boards for case law. She likes the rules to be clear. I like that about her." Amanda arranged peonies in a jar that did not need arranging. Leonard stared at the cinnamon rolls like remembering sugar might solve everything. Dan tried again with a voice that lowered the volume so nobody would notice the pressure rising. "These are basic. You can revoke any time. Let us be efficient." Efficient is not always kind. Efficient sometimes forgets the person in the middle is not a machine. I flipped to the notary block and asked who would stamp. Dan lifted his hand. "A one-stop shop," he said. I smiled because a smile is useful. A shop is for buying. I am not for sale. Email me the drafts. Ruth will call you by noon. They left without eating a roll. I wrote what had happened in my notebook with the steadiness of a person mowing a lawn in straight lines. Dan. Navy suit. Too broad. No independent notary. Time and weather. The hydrangeas outside bloomed a blue so loud the sun looked shy next to them. I taped my list of prescriptions to the fridge at eye level and printed another for my wallet. I set my pill organizer on the table with the lids lined up like soldiers on inspection. I opened my bank app and took screenshots of balances and due dates. I stacked every bill that had been paid on time this year and clipped the stack with a silver clip the size of a single brave idea. Emily texted from school. "You good?" I sent her a picture of the cinnamon rolls and wrote under it "still sweet." She sent back a photo of a math problem about exponents and added a caption that said "Power is tricky," and I laughed in my empty kitchen because she is 16 and already wiser than the man in the navy suit. At 11 Ruth called. "You did right," she said. "Do not sign anything. I will come by at 3. I will bring a narrow power in case you want me to help with a utility while things settle. We will set the lines. They will not." When I hung up, I called the number for the nurse visit Amanda had scheduled for the next afternoon. A woman with a cheerful voice answered. I asked to move the appointment to Friday morning. I asked that the nurse speak with me privately first because family tends to answer for me. She said that was common and that privacy helps people breathe. I wrote her exact phrase in my notebook because good sentences are tools. I tidied the house until the room stood up straight. I put a grocery list on the counter and a church bulletin on the corkboard. I set the sewing machine on the dining table with a hem pinned and half finished so the place would carry proof that I live here and not just store myself here. I lined a basket with fresh dish towels and set it by the stairs with a note that said linens only because labels calm chaotic hands. Leonard came by after lunch and fidgeted with the salt shaker. He asked if Dan had been here. He used the tone he used at 8 years old when he asked if the neighbor's window could be called an accident. I poured him coffee and told the truth. He said he wanted to help. I said help looks like carrying the heavy end of a couch when asked and not rearranging the room while the owner is still inside it. He looked lost and grateful at the same time. Ruth arrived with a tote bag that used to carry spelling tests and now carries statutes. She read Dan's drafts and marked them with red pencil like a teacher correcting a brag. She wrote a limited power that I could revoke by email and printed it twice. She made tea while I signed only the small thing that served a small purpose. She nodded at my pill organizer and the list on the fridge and the neat stack of paid bills and said the thing I had been practicing in my head. Paper helps. We reviewed a plan for the nurse visit. Speak alone first. Invite a walk through. Demonstrate stairs with the rail and the pause on the landing. Show the log of meds and the calendar of appointments. Answer what day it is and who runs the country and what my neighbor's name is without rushing. Then let family join so everyone can hear the same facts with the steam of the coffee still in the air. Near evening I baked chicken and roasted carrots and told Leonard to set the table. Amanda texted that Dan would send revised forms in the morning. I replied with Ruth's card and wrote "Please send all legal questions to my counsel." The sentence tasted like a coin and also like freedom. When the house grew quiet, I walked from room to room with my notebook and wrote down what I owned in words simple enough for a sleepy clerk. Bed. Quilt. Lamp with a shade that looks like late afternoon. Photographs in black frames. Sewing machine older than some marriages. Bible with Harold's name on a flyleaf. Blue hydrangeas in the yard that belonged to the bees and to me. I ended on the back porch where the train sang far off. The sky held the bruised color that makes streetlights feel affectionate. I practiced the sentence again, the one I would use tomorrow and the day after and however long it took to untangle the mess that had walked into my kitchen in a navy suit. I read before I sign. I decide where I live. I will not be moved like furniture. Then I turned off the porch light and put the kettle on one more time because whistles are for both warnings and celebrations and sometimes a day earns both. Friday came in cool and careful. I set the table like a lesson plan. Mug. Pill organizer open to the correct day. Folder labeled home. Notebook by the phone. I wore the navy cardigan with the pearl buttons. The house smelled like coffee and clean paper. I cut one hydrangea bloom and set it in a jar by the sink. That blue can make a room brave. I practiced the phrases that keep a person from being spoken over. Please meet with me alone first. My family loves me and sometimes love talks too much. I am able to decide and I will explain that myself. The bell rang at 10. Carla Ruiz stood on my step with a tote that meant business. Shoes that prefer hallways to carpets. A calm face that has walked past emergencies without catching them. "Call me Carla," she said. We sat at the kitchen table where the light is honest. We began with the simple anchors. Name. Address. Day and date. City and state. I answered without showing off. She asked about bills and appointments. I opened the bank app and read balances and due dates. I showed her the utilities folder with account numbers printed large enough for tired eyes. I pointed to the emergency list on the fridge and to Ruth's card taped beside it. We moved to the pill organizer. Morning. Noon. Evening. Bedtime. Labels clear. Refill dates highlighted. I read the names on each bottle and told her when Dr. Nguyen prefers I take the ACE inhibitor. She checked my blood pressure and smiled at the numbers. She asked me to spell a word backward and I did, then gave the title of the hymn from Sunday. We took the stairs together. I held the rail and paused at the landing to let my knee remember its job. She watched my grip and my balance and the way I stepped off without guessing. In the den I showed the lock in the window and the list taped inside the closet. Back in the kitchen I lifted the lid on the slow cooker and let the pot roast speak for me. She asked about other people's plans. I told her about the deposit at Oak Ridge in Amanda's name and the Saturday timeline and the papers Dan had tried to sell as kindness. She asked what I wanted. To stay here while I am safe here. To plan any change with my own hand on the pen. A car door shut outside. Voices moved down the hall. Amanda entered with a smile that orders chairs to sit up. Leonard followed with a face that wanted to be 4 different men at once. "We are here for the evaluation," Amanda announced. Carla did not turn. "We are speaking privately first," she said. "We will invite you in a moment." We finished the last anchors. Nearest intersection. The diner on the corner. How to call an ambulance when machines forget you. She closed her binder and invited them to join us. She explained what she had measured. Orientation intact. Able to handle daily tasks. Capable of making her own choices. She said the words in a tone that fit the room like a level board. Amanda's mouth opened and shut like a clasp. She said I leave burners on and miss appointments. "Which appointment?" I asked. The room waited. Leonard stared at the floor. "There is a deposit," Amanda said. "We lose it after Friday at 5. Carla nodded the nod of a person who has seen money confuse families. She repeated her conclusion. Independent. Oriented. Capable. She handed me a card and said the report would arrive by email. After Carla left, Amanda accused me of staging the morning. "You moved the time. You cooked on purpose. You set out papers to look competent." I said I rescheduled so I would be rested and clear, that cooking feeds people, and that papers are not a costume. Leonard rubbed his forehead and asked if we could all breathe. "Safe is the goal," I told him. "Control is not the same word." I set 3 bowls and filled them with pot roast and carrots. No one pretended gratitude. Emily arrived with her backpack just as Amanda gathered her purse and left without slamming the door. Emily read the nurse's card and kissed it like a ticket. Then she opened the notebook. "We build the paper fence now," she said. "Straight lines that keep feet honest. Inventory of every box that moves. Signature of the hands that carry it. Photo log of each room before and after. Email for every promise. Copy of every letter." She wrote while I called Oak Ridge to request the file with my name. The staffer said there was no signed admission. I wrote the time and her name and the word none. Leonard asked what he should do. "Carry the heavy end when asked," Emily said, "and keep your pen uncapped." He managed a smile that looked like the boy who once dragged a Christmas tree up the porch steps because he would not be outdone by pine. The afternoon turned patient. Emily photographed rooms and uploaded pictures into a folder labeled Martha Home Current. Leonard labeled bins for the den in letters thick enough to be read from the hallway. I sent an email to Dan that said future legal questions may be directed to Ruth. Ruth replied with a promise to check in before the weekend. I walked to the front door and looked at Ruth's mirror. The glass offered back a woman who had not slept enough but still knew the point of a straight line. I touched the frame and whispered the sentence Harold loved. Lines hold houses up. The house exhaled with me. Night arrived without drama. The train far off sounded like a long sentence ending well. The hydrangeas held their blue at the window like a lantern. I turned off the lights and stood still long enough to feel my shoulders lower from around my ears. Tomorrow would bring the moving truck and clipboards and signatures. Tonight I had a mirror, a list, a granddaughter with a spine, and a sentence strong enough to hold a roof. Paper helps. Saturday arrived with a truck downshifting at the curb and porch air that told the truth. I tied my hair with Emily's yellow ribbon, set coffee to drip, and opened the door before anyone could ring. The van was white with blue letters. Men in denim shirts climbed down and waited. Amanda held a clipboard that did not carry my name. Leonard stared at his shoes. I greeted the foreman and introduced myself as the owner. I held up my own clipboard and a pen that writes a steady line. "We will do this the careful way," I said. "Every box gets a number. Every number gets a description. The person who carries it signs and initials the destination. Anything without a number stays." Cal the foreman glanced at me and grinned. He relayed the rules to his crew. The rhythm changed in a breath. Boxes paused at the dining table while Emily wrote numbers and men signed before carrying on. No one argued with the line where their name would live. Amanda called the careful way a waste. Cal called it protection. Leonard carried in silence and let ink shoulder what his mouth could not. I set a tray with lemon water and cookies and told the crew the porch was theirs when they needed breath. Daisy appeared with baked ziti and a quick kiss for my cheek. I wrote her name on a note and pressed it to the foil so her pan would come home. At mid-morning my email chimed. Oak Ridge sent a cheerful line about an expected arrival. I replied with thanks and asked for any admission forms with my signature and for a written note that no court order existed. I copied Ruth and Nurse Carla. The answer came fast. No forms on record. No guardianship paperwork. Deposit under Amanda. I printed the thread and slid it into a folder labeled Oak Ridge. We paused for sandwiches from the Bluebird Diner. The crew ate on the steps. Amanda scrolled. Leonard told Cal the den was ready for heavier pieces. I checked signatures down the manifest. Cal thanked me for rules everyone could see. After lunch a courier handed me an envelope with county markings. Inside lay a petition for temporary guardianship stamped the day before. The pages claimed fog and danger and unpaid bills. I lined the papers on the table and set real things beside them. Pill organizer open to the correct day. Bank letters with balances and dates. The nurse evaluation stating capable and independent. The email from Oak Ridge that said no authorization had been given. I took a breath that went all the way down and came back clean. Leonard came in with my cedar chest and saw the seal. He set the chest down and read standing up. He frowned and kept reading. He asked if he should call Ruth. I told him yes and asked him to keep listing what the crew had moved so our answer would breathe like a record that lived in the room. Ruth arrived with the calm of a woman who enjoys order. She read, circled, clipped my emails to the front, and pulled a motion from her bag that she had drafted in case this moment came. She asked Emily for one more pass of photos and asked Cal for a copy of the signed pages. Cal produced a set as neat as a hymn book. Ruth nodded and said the line that keeps our weather fair. Paper helps. Amanda tried to order Cal to move my bedroom set to the garage. Cal looked at the manifest, then at me, then back at the page. No signature from the owner. No initials for a destination. No move. Amanda's smile folded into something sharp. Cal offered a cookie. She refused the cookie and the rule in the same breath. The rule stayed. By mid-afternoon the den looked like a place where a woman could sleep and wake steady. Fresh sheets. A lamp with a warm shade. Harold's photo where it belongs. Leonard stood in the doorway and looked like 3 ages at once. He signed for the boxes he had carried and added the time beside his name. He did not say the word sorry. The ink said it better. Ruth set a small mirror on the table, the frame painted cheerful kitchen green. She asked where we could hang it by the door. A person should see her own face before she answers hard questions. We hung it near the knob. I tested it. I looked like a woman who had walked out of bad weather with dry socks. I decided to keep her. The last run to storage finished just before the light turned honey. Cal returned the clipboard and asked if I wanted a copy for my records. Yes, I said, and watched relief move through his shoulders when he realized this house would not let blame fall on the wrong backs. Emily thanked him for treating rooms like rooms and not like piles of wood arranged by chance. He thanked her for numbers that made sense. Evening pressed the windows. Leonard swept the floor. Amanda stood very still and tapped her phone as if it were a barometer. I filed the red folder with the petition and the motion and the nurse report behind a row of cookbooks, then wrote a thank you to Daisy and washed the coffee pot until it shone. The house began to sound like itself again. A clock ticked. A refrigerator hummed. Far off a train spoke. Cal paused on the porch to say good night. He told me his mother kept a list of birds and that the final entry was a goldfinch that would not sit still. He said paperwork is love in slow motion. I wrote the sentence on my hand so I could copy it into the notebook before sleep. When the house was quiet, I stood at the mirror and spoke to the face that looked back. The petition does not define me. The judge will read and will see. Truth wears paper better than rumor. The floor under my feet felt like mine. I slept in my own bed and dreamed of ink that does not smudge and lines that hold and a white truck driving away because the work was done and the house had decided to keep me. Rain rinsed the sky on Sunday and the hydrangeas bowed as if someone had spoken a blessing over them. I woke early and wrote a short list named errands for the soul on the pad by the phone. Church. Bank. Daisy. I tucked the list into my cardigan pocket and felt calmer the way a child feels calmer when she carries a pebble that fits her palm. Emily came by with a tote that said library on one side and revolution on the other. We walked under one umbrella to St. Bridget and sang with the pews instead of the choir. After Mass, Father Tom asked if I needed anything and I asked him to pray the short prayers that fit between breaths. He promised. Then he hugged me so firmly I thought my ribs might file it under evidence. The bank on Jefferson Avenue has doors that swing easy and rails that shine like they remember when people polished metal with pride. A man named Gilbert met us near a plant that had outlived 3 managers. He wore a tie with tiny anchors and a calm that should be bottled. I told him I wanted to review beneficiaries and that I wanted a clear statement that no power of attorney had been added. He led us to a small office where the window framed the river and the city like a painting hung straight. We checked each account the way careful people check a stove before leaving for a trip. My name stood alone where it should. Gilbert printed a page that declared no outside access and he stamped it with something that thumped like a heartbeat. He asked if I wanted a safe deposit box. I said yes because paper sleeps best behind steel. We signed the rental card and he guided us into the vault where the air felt serious and respectful. Emily read the box number twice and smiled in a way that made the fluorescent lights look almost kind. Back in the office, Gilbert asked if I wished to add a pay-on-death name to the small savings Harold once called the jar for rainy days. I did. I chose Emily and wrote her full name with the neatness a teacher cannot retire from. Gilbert printed confirmation and the printer spit out Faith in 8-point type. He folded the page with squared edges and slid it into a sleeve. People forget that belief can be printed. I do not. We thanked him and I promised lemon bars as soon as the oven agreed. On the way out I waved at the teller with the blue nails and she called me Miss Martha even though I keep telling her Miss is a hat I do not wear. Emily laughed and said the nails matched the flowers and I said that beauty understands kinship better than any committee. Next stop was Daisy because dental work turns soup into medicine. We brought chicken noodle from the Bluebird and a bouquet that smelled like sunshine. Daisy lowered herself into her chair and listened like rain listens to gutters. I told her about the petition and the mirror and the motion and the way Cal's crew respected lines. She patted my hand and said paper was love in slow motion, and I told her I had stolen that line from Cal and that he had given it freely. When we got home, the mail waited with its usual poker face. Inside sat a notice from the clerk that confirmed the petition had been received and that more evidence was required before any hearing could be scheduled. Missing items included an independent medical evaluation and proof of unpaid bills. I read the list the way a nurse reads a chart and felt steadier because the blanks were already filled in my file drawer. I scanned the notice and sent it to Ruth and wrote Monday plan in the subject. She replied within 5 minutes and attached a draft motion to dismiss for lack of merit. She wanted 3 letters from people who could describe my ordinary competence. I called Father Tom. I called Daisy. I walked next door and asked Cal. Each said yes, as if I had asked them to pass the salt. Leonard arrived near dusk with a bag of groceries he had chosen like a man trying to learn a new language. Spaghetti. Tomatoes. Bread. He set everything on the counter and looked both guilty and hopeful. We cooked together without talking about courtrooms or deposits or the way silence can bruise a mother when used as a tool. We ate at the oak table and the bread tasted like honesty. He washed dishes while I dried, and we looked like we had looked 1,000 nights when homework crowded the table and Harold whistled from his chair. After dishes, I gave Leonard a copy of the bank letters and the nurse card and the email from Oak Ridge that said no admission had been authorized. He read each page slowly as if the ink held secrets. He told me he had not known about the filing until after Amanda had marched it to the clerk. He looked sick saying that, and I believed him. People confuse agreement with silence. He had kept quiet, and the quiet had been used as permission. He asked if he could sleep on the couch for a few nights because he needed air that did not ring. I said yes and put a fresh sheet on the cushions. I will not teach my own child a lesson by withholding a pillow. Emily cheered softly and asked Leonard to carry the box of photos down from the hall closet. He did. We opened the lid and 1,000 moments sat up and smiled. Harold in his navy blues. Leonard in a Little League uniform with his hat on backward. Me in a blue dress next to hydrangeas that looked smaller than they do today but carried the same shade of stubborn. Before bed, I sorted the new documents into folders with tabs that refused to lean. Oak Ridge. Bank. Nurse report. Motion. Clerk. Letters. In the safe deposit envelope, I placed a copy of the beneficiary update and the vault rental card. Emily drew a tiny hydrangea next to the label and said art belongs everywhere. She is right. The house felt grateful. I heard it in the way the hallway kept quiet and in the way the den welcomed sleep without asking to be praised for it. I stood in front of Ruth's mirror and practiced the words that had carried me through the first half of the storm. I read before I sign. I decide where I live. Boring saves lives. My phone buzzed and Gilbert had sent a secure message confirming the attempted online request that used Amanda's maiden name had been blocked. He would mail the formal note. I thanked him again and promised the lemon bars by Tuesday because promises taste better when they come with sugar. I slept with my notebook on the nightstand and the clerk's notice under Ruth's mirror, so the first thing the morning would see was the thing that proved my voice had weight. The rain stopped sometime after midnight and the hydrangeas lifted their wet heads and faced the house as if they were guarding a door that finally remembered the sound of my key. Monday put on a gray jacket and stood up straight. Ruth pulled to the curb with travel mugs that made the car smell like payday pancakes, and we drove downtown while the river kept pace outside the passenger window. The county building waited with its doors wide and its metal detector humming a tune only keys can hear. The lobby looked like every lobby in the Midwest that believes concrete and fluorescent lights can pretend to be marble and sunshine. Ruth smiled at the deputy who checked our bags, and the deputy smiled back at a woman who reads rules like sheet music. The clerk's counter had a bell and a plastic stand that asked for patience. Ruth rang the bell with one knuckle and slid our folder across the ledge as gently as a mother lays down a sleeping child. The clerk wore reading glasses on a chain and hair the color of good toffee. She opened the folder and I watched her face change the way faces change when puzzle pieces choose each other. Nurse evaluation that said I am capable. Bank letters with crisp stamps that said nobody else has their hand in the drawer. Email from Oak Ridge that said no admission was authorized. Inventory manifest with neat initials from men who carry other people's lives for a living. Letters from Father Tom and Daisy and Cal that sounded like neighbors and not like lawyers and therefore sounded like truth. We paid the filing fee and the clerk stamped the top page with a sound that felt like a small applause. She gave Ruth a receipt and a number and told us the motion would be seen by the judge before the weekend. Ruth thanked her and then asked if there was a staff member who might hear a concern about timing. The clerk nodded upstairs and we went. The assistant outside the judge's door listened as Ruth explained that a petition can bruise a life just by sitting on a desk and breathing. Ruth used careful words that fit inside polite rooms. The assistant used careful words that said she would carry our folder into the right hands as soon as the calendar allowed. Both women were steady and kind and neither wasted a syllable. It was like watching two people build a short bridge from opposite banks. We ate sandwiches on a bench that faced a patch of lawn trying to be a park. A pigeon eyed our chips with the same hope Leonard wore last night at the kitchen sink. Ruth said she once thought about library school and I told her she is a librarian at heart because she makes chaos find its shelf. We laughed like old colleagues who still enjoy inside jokes about chalk dust and chorus practice. Next stop was the post office because some truths deserve green cards and bar codes. We mailed certified copies to Amanda and to Dan with return receipts so nobody could pretend a letter vanished into weather. The woman at the counter knew Ruth by name and told me that our town sends more packages on Mondays than any other day. People do their brave errands after a weekend of thinking. I added that sentence to my notebook when we got back in the car. At home I made lentil soup and Ruth sat at the table and drafted a short letter to the moving company requesting the detailed invoice under Amanda's name and the signed work order for our file. She said every mess has a birth certificate and a paper trail and usually a person named Peggy who knows exactly where the file cabinet lives. We laughed because we have both known Peggy's and we adore their accuracy. Amanda arrived without warning and without air around her words. She called us dramatic. She said I was ungrateful. She said guardianship was her gift and that she could not be blamed for trying to keep me safe. Ruth offered tea in a voice that turned the heat down half a notch. Amanda declined the tea and kept the heat. Ruth explained the motion and the exhibits with a tone that could balance a glass of water on a moving bus. She warned that any further attempt to force a signature or to remove property without permission would be documented and could reach the county office that handles exploitation. Amanda blinked like a camera with the wrong setting, then said Emily had turned me against family. I told her Emily had inherited Harold's love of straight lines and that a straight line is not a weapon. Amanda left with her shoulder squared the way a flag squares itself at wind it cannot command. In the late afternoon Cal stopped by with an extra copy of the manifest and the time sheet signed by his crew. He had printed them on paper that made the ink sit up and behave. He said his boss appreciated clean jobs and that he wished every house wrote numbers on boxes before lifting them. He told me his mother's last list was birds seen from a window. I told him I had written down his line about paperwork being love in slow motion and that it would stay in my notebook beside the hymn titles. He nodded and put a small tool kit on the counter and said every house needs a hammer that remembers its purpose. Emily arrived after school with a plastic file box and a storm of tabs. We sat on the floor and built a city for documents with streets and addresses and neighborhoods that would keep them from running into each other at night. She labeled Oak Ridge and nurse report and clerk in motion and bank in letters and moving company, and she wrote the names in the tidy capitals she uses when she wants to look older than she is. She slid a small envelope into the front labeled receipts and tucked the certified mail stubs inside as if they were feathers. Leonard texted that he was staying with a coworker for a night or two. He wrote that he was thinking. He wrote that thinking hurt. I told him I loved him and that the porch light would be on whenever he needed it. He sent a heart and I pictured the hydrangeas pulsing blue in the dusk like a lighthouse that prefers front yards to oceans. Near evening the judge's assistant called. She said the motion had been placed at the top of the stack for review and that we should be reachable the next day. Ruth thanked her and I thanked her and Emily made a whooping sound that she pretended was a sneeze. We ate soup with buttered toast and talked about nothing important on purpose because even a good day can feel heavy and a person needs to put the weight down and look at the ordinary. After dishes, I hung Ruth's little mirror by the door at the exact height where my eyes fall when I am carrying in groceries. I slipped an index card under the frame that said paper helps in black ink so plain it could be a road sign. I practiced looking into my own face before answering an imagined knock. It is amazing what a simple pane of glass can do for a spine. The house quieted the way houses quiet when their owner has returned to herself. The refrigerator hummed. The old clock in the hallway kept time like it had made an oath in 1991 and had no intention of breaking it. I turned pages in a book without reading a single sentence and still felt soothed because paper turned under fingers is another kind of lullaby. Before bed, I stepped onto the porch and let the night air move around me. The street was soft and the sky wore no mood at all. I told Harold the day had gone well and that the next day would bring either a decision or another round of waiting and that either way we were ready. I went back inside, checked the latch, and stood once more at the mirror. The woman in the glass looked like a person who knew how to live in her own house. I decided to keep her again. Tuesday stepped onto the porch with the shy light that makes dew pretend to be pearls. I clipped 2 wilted blooms and told the hedge it had done its best. A van rolled to the curb with a cartoon key on the side and a man in a canvas jacket climbed out with a toolbox that talked with every step. Amanda pulled in behind him and waved the way people wave when they have already decided the ending. "Morning," the locksmith said, polite and careful. "Which doors are we rekeying?" Amanda answered for the house and pointed to the front and the kitchen door. I held up my hand like a crossing guard and said the work was not authorized. The locksmith looked from her to me and back again. He asked who owned the property. I told him the owner stood in front of him holding a pen and a file box and that the owner had not ordered locks. Amanda rustled a paper and said she had a work order. I read it and smiled because it carried only her signature. The locksmith shifted and reset his feet. He said he would need permission from the owner or a court order. I told him there was no court order and that if he touched my lock without my consent I would invite a patrol car to watch him touch it. He nodded like a man grateful for a reason to stay out of family weather. He tipped his cap and left as quickly as courtesy allowed. I taped a letter beside the bell that said all work must be authorized in writing by the owner and that anyone without written permission would be asked to leave. Emily arrived in time to take a photo of the letter as if it were a monument. She suggested a second sign by the back door and I agreed. We drank coffee and laughed because laughter loosens the screws that fear tightens. A white envelope slid through the mail slot near noon and landed with a thud that wanted attention. Inside was a letter from Dan that warned I was being unreasonable and that the judge would interpret resistance as confusion. I read it twice and then handed it to Ruth over the phone. She laughed softly, then wrote a reply that thanked him for his concern and reminded him that capacity is a legal threshold measured by facts. She attached the nurse report and the bank letters and the Oak Ridge emails and a copy of the sign by my door. She ended with a sentence that suggested groceries and a porch sweep if concern needed an outlet. His answer came back shorter and less proud. Mr. Hill wandered over for the latter and told me about a pair of orioles he had spotted by the school. We stood at the property line and let the air be ordinary for 5 minutes. He said the birds had found a safe branch. I said the house had found a safe sentence. We both smiled at how nature and paper enjoy each other when people behave. Emily sat up at the dining table with her laptop and made a page called House Rules for Strangers. She typed that deliveries come to the porch and that workers must carry papers with my name and that anyone who tries a lock will meet a call to the non-emergency number. She printed it large and we taped it inside the front window where sunlight made the words look warm and strong. In the early afternoon the phone rang and the world shifted half an inch toward mercy. The judge's assistant spoke with the steady voice of someone who respects both clocks and people. The motion to dismiss had been granted. The petition was gone before it could grow teeth. Written notes would be ready at the clerk's office by Thursday. I thanked her twice and promised to send a card that said her name spelled correctly because names deserve that. Emily hooped so loud a sparrow lifted off the railing. I called Leonard and he answered as if he had been waiting with the phone in his hand. He said he already knew because Amanda had told him but he wanted to hear me say it. I said it and his breath changed shape. He said he was on his way. He arrived and stared at the hydrangeas like they had done the work. He said he was sorry in a voice that finally believed itself. I told him I forgave the part that belonged to him and that the rest would take its time. Amanda texted that she would be consulting a different attorney. Ruth rolled her eyes small enough to count as restraint and reminded me that silence was sometimes a gift. We ate grilled cheese at the counter like people who know how to be simple when they could be complicated. Emily sliced apples and organized the certified mail stubs into the envelope marked receipts. The house felt taller. Cal stopped by just before supper with a copy of the manifest for his files and another for mine. He said his boss liked neat endings and that our job had become an example of why signatures keep peace. He left a small box of screws and said everyone deserves a drawer labeled useful. I wrote that on an index card and tucked it into Ruth's mirror. As the sun slid low, I walked the rooms and touched what stayed. Beds made. Drawers closed. The sewing machine waiting for a hem to finish its sentence. I took the red folder that had carried the petition and replaced it with a thin folder that carried the order of dismissal. I placed both in the cabinet where Harold once kept Christmas lights and said out loud that endings matter. Emily opened her camera and recorded a short lesson she titled 3 Ways a Grandmother Keeps a House. She listed a notebook, a mirror, and a neighbor who knows birds. She asked permission to post and I said yes. She promised to edit out my tears. She posted and then came back to the porch and pressed her head to my shoulder the way she did at 5 when fireworks frightened her. We watched the street. We let the quiet be proof. That night Leonard folded blankets on the couch like a man who wanted to sleep near forgiveness. He said he would be looking for an apartment in the morning and asked if I would bring a plant on moving day. I said I would bring a spider plant and a small list because both thrive in light. He laughed and for a second I saw the child who named fireflies with his own words before learning the common ones. Before bed I stood at the mirror and looked for the line worry had carved between my eyes. It was still there but softer. I pressed the index card that said paper helps and felt the edge of it against my palm like a small blade that cuts only rope. I thanked the house for holding me and I thanked the people who had held the paper that held the truth. The train called from far off and sounded like a bell that knows its job. I turned out the lights and let the house find its rhythm. Locks unturned because they had never been changed. Windows cracked to let the night say what it needed to say. I slept with the dismissal order under the mirror so the morning would greet the day by reading a sentence that gave the house back its voice. Thursday morning the clerk's office released the judge's written decision. Ruth picked up a certified copy and brought it to my kitchen like it was a pie still warm. We sat at the table with tea and read each paragraph as if we were tasting a recipe that had taken years to perfect. The judge wrote that the petition lacked evidence and that recent evaluations showed no impairment and that the court would not entertain further filings without new facts. The judge wrote that the court took seriously the independence of older adults and their right to decide where they live. My eyes filled the way the creek fills after rain and I pressed the paper flat with both hands and told the house it could breathe. News travels through families the way coffee travels through a filter. Slowly and then suddenly. Leonard arrived with grocery bags and a mop. He said nothing at first. He mopped the kitchen because he did not know where to put his hands. Then he told me he had started sleeping in the break room at work after a fight with Amanda. He said Amanda blamed Emily and me and Ruth and the nurse and the judge and the hydrangeas. He said Amanda wanted to sell the house and move to a condominium with fountains that make noise while nobody swims. I listened and then I handed him a sponge and told him we could wipe the countertops and let talking wait until talking had somewhere to sit. In the afternoon a letter came from Oak Ridge. It said they had closed the file and that they were sorry for the confusion. There was no apology for the deposit because the deposit was in Amanda's name and non-refundable. I placed the letter in the Oak Ridge folder and wrote a note to myself that said sometimes a win includes an accounting of losses you can live with. Emily called from a bus and told me the choir teacher had chosen a song for the spring concert that uses the word hallelujah and that she planned to sing that word like a door opening. Cal stopped by with a package that had been left at his shop by mistake. Inside was a lamp Harold had loved and a stack of books that smelled like school. I asked Cal if the invoice had been sorted. He said the owner had called Amanda for payment and Amanda had said some crisp words about misunderstandings and then had paid because the signature on the work order was hers. Cal looked at the manifest and told me he had never seen a job go that clean. I told him his crew moved like men who understood that time is valuable when it belongs to someone else. That evening I received an email from Dan. He wrote that he respected the court's decision. He wrote that his representation of Leonard and Amanda on the guardianship matter was concluded. He wrote that he hoped the family would find a way forward without further legal involvement. Ruth read the email over my shoulder and nodded. She said he had written like a man who knows when to set down his briefcase and walk away before it becomes a suitcase he has to carry through too many airports. We celebrated with pot roast again because tradition is a soft chair for tired bones. We set the table with the good plates that Harold carried up from the basement every Thanksgiving. Emily lit candles and pretended we were in a restaurant with a long name and a waiter who called her Miss. Leonard cooked the carrots until they were sweet and almost shy. We ate and we spoke like people who have learned to say two things at once. I love you and I am angry. I see you and I need space. I want you safe and I want you to trust me. The table held everything without wobbling. After dishes, Leonard asked if he could stay in the guest room for a week while he found an apartment. He said he needed to think without Amanda's weather system pushing clouds through his mind. I told him yes and reminded him that house rules were simple. Rinse your plate. Hang up your towel. Tell the truth even when it makes the room colder for a minute. He laughed and said my rules were better than a lease. Before bed I took the judge's order to Ruth's mirror and read the key lines out loud until my mouth memorized them. Then I propped the paper on the mantel next to Harold's photo so he could see that I had not failed the home we had built. The house made a sound then. It was the sound an old friend makes when she finally gets to sit down and take off her shoes. It was kindness wrapped in wood and nails. I slept with the windows cracked and dreamed of choir music and of a clerk stamp thumping in rhythm with a heart that had refused to become a signature on someone else's plan. Friday set the table for itself. I made pancakes because Emily had slept over and teenagers wake hungry even when life is full. We stood at the stove and flipped circles of batter until the kitchen smelled like a carnival that figured out how to behave. She stacked the pancakes and I poured syrup in careful threads and we ate leaning on the counter the way people do when a chair would slow them down. The phone rang while we were rinsing plates. Gilbert from the bank spoke in the voice people use when they wish they did not have to bring weather into a sunny room. An online request had arrived overnight to add an authorized user to my checking account. The name looked a lot like Amanda's maiden name with one letter shaved thin. Did I submit it? I did not. He froze the attempt, added a note, and promised a letter for my file. I thanked him and promised lemon bars for his break room because sugar makes good habits feel like celebration. I wrote a line in my notebook that felt like a truth I needed to keep. When people fear they are losing control, they speed up. Speed feels like competence. Quiet feels like a trap. Then I called Ruth, who called Dan, who called Amanda. The phone felt warm from all the miles it ran in place. Leonard came into the kitchen and saw us standing there with the sink full and the air worried. He learned about the request and his shoulders dropped in that way guilt teaches shoulders to move. He said he would speak to his wife. He said again he was sorry without trying to stack the word like a card house. Just one apology placed where it belonged. I believed him because sincerity smells the same at any age. The doorbell began its parade. First Daisy, balancing a dish that had every comfort Iowa ever baked inside one casserole. Then Mr. Hill with a jar he called fence pickles, which made me laugh hard enough to find out my ribs can still be trusted. Father Tom next with a prayer card for St. Joseph and a note in careful loops that read "Build what matters." Then Cal with a small tool kit and a card that said "For when a nail feels like a win." Each person stood in my doorway as if my porch had become a public square. I am not a lighthouse, I told them, though their eyes treated me like one. I am a woman in a cardigan who owns a pen. Still, I let the light spill both ways. Emily set up her camera on the porch and asked if she could record a short lesson. She titled it "Tech Tips from a Grandmother Who Reads the Fine Print." I told her yes as long as she edited out my tears. She explained how to call the bank using the number on the back of your card, how to turn on alerts for changes, how to ask medical staff for a private conversation before inviting family into the room. She posted it and later showed me comments from strangers who had already checked their settings. That felt like church without pews. Near noon the mail slot barked. Among catalogs and a polite postcard from the library sat an envelope from the moving company. Inside was a refund check for a small overpayment, made out to Amanda. The universe enjoys a callback. I walked it to Leonard where he sat in his car pretending to think but really just breathing where no one asked him a question. I handed him the envelope and he stared at his wife's name. I told him to put it into whatever account had paid the invoice. He nodded, then tucked the check into his shirt pocket like a lesson. Back inside, the house asked for everyday things. I watered the spider plant. Emily wiped the stovetop until it remembered its shine. We added the bank phone call to the file, printed Gilbert's email, and slid the page into the folder that now felt like a spine. I taped a small card inside the cabinet that said two-factor on all the accounts and showed Emily how to label it done with a pencil tick when each box was complete. Boring saves lives. We say it now like a grace before meals. In the afternoon I found a shoebox of paper scraps in the hall closet. On top sat a news clipping about Harold going off to training, and under that a grocery list with items written in an order that traced the aisles of the market. I showed Emily the list and she laughed. "Your brain is a map," she said. "Mine is," I said. "Yours is too." She nodded and kept sorting, pulling out a bundle of old church bulletins that still smelled faintly of palm leaves and winter coats. The phone buzzed. Gilbert again, a short update to confirm the freeze had blocked a second attempt that tried a middle initial this time. He would add that detail to the letter. I thanked him as if he had handed me a rope from a window. After we hung up I wrote that sentence down so I would remember the feel of being helped by someone whose job is to keep numbers honest. Emily suggested we take a walk. We moved down the block where the sidewalk turns into a neighborhood ribbon. A neighbor boy zipped past on a scooter and shouted that my flowers looked like a video game. I took it as a compliment from a foreign land and waved like an ambassador who has learned to smile in every language. We circled the block once and the sky agreed that we had done enough. Back home we spread Polaroids on the oak table the way fortune's tellers spread cards. There was Harold in his navy blues grinning at a future that would hold hydrangeas and Boy Scouts and a teacher who never learned to be bored. There was Leonard at 6 with 2 teeth missing and a baseball glove he wore like a crown. There was Emily at 5 squinting at fireworks from behind my legs. The images made their own sentence. Family is a set of promises kept one everyday action at a time. The day held one more gift. An email from the choir director with a note that the spring concert program would include a song that used the word hallelujah in a way that felt like a door opening. Emily read it aloud and practiced the word under her breath until it fit her mouth. Dusk put its hands on the windows. Leonard came out to the porch and sat. He did not talk. Some conversations do not want words. We sat and watched the hydrangeas change color the way panes of glass change as the sun steps down. After a while he said he would start looking for an apartment tomorrow and asked if I might visit once he found a place. I told him I would bring a spider plant and a list because both survive on light and water and truth. I wrote one more page before bed. I titled it What I Know Now and listed quiet facts in my slow hand. Hydrangeas look bluer after rain. Banks depend on people more than machines. A judge can give a house its voice with a paragraph. A son can be kinder than the man he is trying to impress. A woman can become new by doing old things well. I tore the page free and tucked it behind Ruth's mirror so the words could face the door. When the night deepened I stood at the window and watched the porch light claim its small circle. Somewhere a train spoke in a long sentence with a soft period. The house breathed the easy way an honest sleeper breathes. I turned down the sheet, slid into a bed that had held its ground all week, and let the day fold itself up like a letter that had said everything it needed to say. Saturday woke with the sound of the kettle and the smell of lemon bars because I had promised Gilbert a plate for his break room. The house felt lighter the way a person feels lighter after a deep breath. Emily arrived early with a laptop and 3 legal pads and an energy that looked exactly like spring finding a crack in the sidewalk. "We should make a map," she said before her backpack hit the chair. "Stories help, but steps help too." She opened a fresh document and typed a title that made me laugh and then made me proud. "Paper beats pressure." She asked me to add the parts that were mine and to keep my sentences plain enough for a clerk who had not slept. Plain is a language I have taught my whole life. We wrote for 4 hours without feeling the clock. We explained how to set up bank alerts and why to call the number on the card instead of trusting links that arrive like gifts. We wrote how to request a private conversation with a nurse before inviting family into the room so a person can answer questions without a chorus. We wrote how to place a pill organizer in sight of a window because sunlight reminds the body what to do next. We wrote how to keep a notebook with time and weather and words spoken in rooms where decisions were made. We wrote that a limited power can be a friend while a broad one can be a cliff. We added a page called After the Storm that listed ways to return to ordinary without forgetting what was learned. We kept our voices kind. We did not make villains. We made lines. Leonard came in halfway through with a face that wanted to help and hands that did not know where to land. I slid a pad across the table and asked him to write from the point of view of a son who wants to help without taking the wheel. He sat and he wrote, and his words walked a narrow street between shame and hope. He wrote about believing the loudest person because quiet felt like agreement. He wrote about learning that help can be holding a flashlight while someone else fixes the pipe. He wrote about asking better questions and then staying quiet long enough to hear answers that did not flatter him. When he finished, I read his pages and felt 2 tears slide where I could not stop them. Emily pretended to adjust the lamp so I could wipe my face without announcing it. We printed the guide and slid a copy into the safe deposit envelope because some documents deserve steel and humming air. We sent another to Father Tom for the church bulletin and one to Gilbert for the bank board and one to Nurse Carla for whatever nurses do when they collect stories that steady their hands. Emily posted a version on her school site with the counselor's blessing. She told me 3 classmates had already written to say their grandparents would be grateful. The house settled into a silence that did not feel like warning. I opened 3 windows and let air roll down the hallway until the curtains believed in movement again. I baked bread that cracked as it cooled while Leonard fixed the pantry hinge that had clicked since winter. The click vanished. He stood there waiting for a medal and I gave him a hug instead. He asked if I would visit his new apartment on Monday once he had keys. I promised a spider plant and a list because both thrive on simple care. Amanda did not come by. She sent a short text that said she would stay with her sister for a while. I answered that I wished her clear weather and that I hoped she would find a way to let fear loosen its grip. I did not chase her. Silence can be a kind decision when words would only bruise. After lunch, Emily suggested a walk and we took the long way to the river. Geese arranged themselves like a committee. Sunlight slid across water that looked like polished steel. Emily talked about college and how she wanted a place where teachers still taught students to write with fountain pens. She said pens change the speed of a thought and make sentences feel like choices. I told her she already writes like a person who trusts choices. We stood there without talking for a while and let the water move ideas we had not earned yet. Back home, I gathered the week's papers into their neighborhoods. Clerk. Nurse. Bank. Oak Ridge. Motion. Letters. Moving company. Receipts. I slid a small card into the front of the file box that said boring saves lives and felt the truth of it like a steady hand on my back. Emily tied the lemon bars with string and wrote for the crew on the box. She included a note that thanked the tellers for calling when something looked wrong. People deserve thanks for doing the job the right way. Toward evening, the house made the sounds of contentment that old houses make when the pressure changes. The refrigerator hummed without complaint. The hallway clock kept its oath. The den breathed like a room that knows it will be used for naps and letters and nothing dramatic for a while. I set a bouquet of hydrangea stems in a jar on the table because that blue is a sentence that does not need words. We ate simple food. Eggs scrambled slowly. Toast from the fresh loaf with butter that shone like small sunlight. Leonard washed the pan and set it upside down the way Harold used to. Emily dried and stacked and created the neat tower that makes a kitchen feel like a promise kept. We watched the early evening slide down the windows and did not try to make it do anything else. After dishes, I set Ruth's mirror flat on the table and traced the green frame with one finger like a girl tracing her own name until the loops feel like home. I tucked an index card behind the glass that said keep your voice quiet and your pen busy. It looked modest tucked there. It looked right. A small thing happened that meant more than its size. Leonard brought me a key on a cheap ring and asked if I would keep a copy for emergencies once he moved. I said yes and wrote Leonard Spare on a label because labels prevent hurt feelings. He thanked me and looked relieved in a way that reminded me of a third grader who has finally learned long division. Night came with a sky the color of my cardigan. Emily sat on the porch bench and practiced the word hallelujah under her breath the way a soprano checks a note before offering it to a room. Leonard stretched out on the rug with the tool kit open and tightened the handle on the hall closet just because he could. I sat with my notebook and wrote down what the day had been so I could keep it later when memory plays tricks. I wrote that a guide had been born at my table. I wrote that a hinge had stopped complaining and that a son had written the kind of apology that does not ask for applause. I wrote that a girl had chosen pens over screens and that the river had been a mirror. I wrote that quiet is a kind of music and that a house can learn the tune again if someone will hum it softly long enough. Before bed I stood at the door and looked into the mirror where my eyes meet themselves. The woman looking back did not look heroic. She looked like someone who folded laundry and paid bills and knew her neighbors. She looked like the kind of person who would keep a porch light on without asking anyone to promise anything. I decided to keep her a third day in a row. I turned off the lamps one by one so each room could understand evening in its own time. The hydrangeas held their blue at the window like patient choir members waiting for the cue. Somewhere a train said its long sentence across town. I slid between sheets that remembered me and I slept like someone who had finally set a stack of books neatly on a shelf. Sunday arrived with bells and cool air that made the hydrangeas lift their heavy heads. I wore the cardigan with the pearls because repetition can be courage in a different dress. Emily met me at St. Bridget and we sang from the pews while the choir did its best to find the same key at the same time. After Mass, Father Tom said my cheeks had more color. I told him I had discovered a new cosmetic called Finish Paperwork and he laughed so hard Daisy had to steady his elbow. A handful of parish volunteers stayed behind to patch the church steps where winter had chewed lines into stone. Leonard showed up with a borrowed toolbox and that look sons have when they want to be counted among the helpful. Cal rolled in with a pair of blue ladders and a thermos the size of a bowling pin. We worked until our shadows shortened and then worked a little more because the rhythm locked in and nobody wanted to be the one to make it stop. Someone put the radio on and an old song shook the dust off memories that still fit. When the last beat of mortar settled smooth, Father Tom said the steps looked like they remembered who they were meant to be. We packed up with the pleasant ache that follows decent work. Back at my place the hydrangeas met us like a band in blue uniforms. Leonard stood on the porch and squinted as if measuring something only he could see. I want to build a bench, he said, the kind that lets you wave without standing up. The kind that tells people they are welcome to pause. I said the porch had been waiting for someone to say those words out loud. We drove to the hardware store where the lumber aisle smells like promises even when the economy forgets its manners. Leonard chose boards with calm grain and edges that did not sulk. Emily found a tin of stain with the word honey on it and declared the color would look like late afternoon no matter what time the clock believed. The man at the register rang us up and told me he keeps screws in old jam jars because he likes to see the work waiting. I wrote that in my pocket notebook while Leonard loaded wood with a care that made me proud enough to pretend I was just checking the receipt. We spread sawhorses on the driveway and read the instructions like a recipe 2 generations could agree on. Emily held the paper flat with a palm while Leonard measured twice the way Harold taught him. I handed screws and wiped dust and kept a magnet handy in case a tiny piece decided to learn how to disappear. The bench came together without argument. Corners met where they were supposed to meet. A board that had seemed too plain looked perfect once the legs found their places. We brushed on stain and watched the wood darken into something friendly. When it dried, we carried it to the porch and set it under the window that keeps morning for itself. I sat and waved at the empty air just to practice. A scooter clattered by and the boy riding it yelled that the bench had good vibes. I decided that was the kind of review I would frame if reviews came on paper. While Leonard put away tools, Emily dragged a chair into a slice of shade and opened a shoebox she had found under the eaves. Inside were letters I had written to Harold during the months he worked 2 states away early in our marriage. I had forgotten how clean the world can feel when a pen is sure of itself. I read aloud a paragraph about grocery prices and canned peaches and the way the geese bossed the river that spring. Emily filmed a few sentences on her phone for the family archive she claims she is building. She says every family needs a place where truth can sit down and stop fidgeting. I agree. The afternoon tilted toward lemonade. We set glasses on the railing and let the neighborhood be a parade. Mr. Hill wandered over to return the ladder he had borrowed last week and to report that the Orioles were back and acting like they paid the taxes on the maple. Daisy waved from her porch and promised to bring over a plate of something she called church picnic even though no picnic had been scheduled. Cal drove past and honked and the sound felt like approval from a sensible uncle. A message chimed. Amanda. She wrote that she was sorry for the way she had handled everything and that fear had worn her outfit for too long. She said she had made an appointment to talk to someone about why she drives with the emergency brake on even when the road is clear. She asked if she might stop by next week to return the unused key that the locksmith never got to justify. I told her yes. Returning things is one of my favorite sacraments. We ate banana bread on the new bench and named it without holding a vote. The paper porch. Emily painted the words on a small board from the scrap pile and added a tiny blue bloom in the corner. We hung the sign with 2 short screws and stepped back the way people step back from a painting and trust their eyes. The name fit. It felt like a handshake between wood and ink. Toward evening, Leonard disappeared into the spare room and came back with a box he had unearthed from the top shelf of the closet. Inside were trinkets the house had saved for us. A train ticket stub from the year Harold taught Leonard how to count mile markers. A napkin from the Bluebird Diner with a doodle of a hydrangea that looked like a cloud trying to learn cursive. A recipe card in Harold's blocky hand that said chili and then crossed it out and wrote Martha better. We laughed until the day loosened its tie. A small thing happened that felt like a hinge. Leonard handed me a slip of paper with his new address written in careful print and asked if I would bring a plant when I visit. I told him I would bring a spider plant and a list because plants and lists know how to live anywhere. He rolled the paper into a tight straw and said he would keep it in his wallet for luck. The sun took its time setting and I let it. I watered the hydrangeas and thanked them for holding the color steady no matter what the rest of us decided to do. Emily stretched out on the bench and practiced the word hallelujah under her breath to see how it felt against the boards. It felt right. A breeze lifted the little sign and let it fall again as if the porch were nodding. We moved inside when the air cooled. Emily stitched a loose hem on one of my skirts while Leonard fixed the wobbly handle on the hall closet door. He tightened the screw and then stood back and waited for praise the way a first grader waits for a sticker. I gave him a hug that lasted long enough to count as both praise and truce. He looked taller afterward, which is a trick hugs know. Before bed I stepped onto the porch alone and sat on the bench to see if the night would talk. It did. Somewhere a dog walked his person. A car drifted by with a window down and music soft enough to share. Far off a train stitched 2 ends of town together with a line only the patient can hear. I looked at the little sign and at the mirror by the door and at the blue blooms posted like friendly sentries. I said thank you to the week for breaking and mending in the right sequence. I said thank you to lines that held. I said thank you to quiet that did not mean surrender. When I went back in, the house smelled like wood and soap and something sweeter I could not name. I stood at the mirror and met the woman who looked back. She appeared ordinary and a little tired and entirely herself. That is the look I have chased all my life without realizing it. I turned off lights room by room so each could learn the new rhythm. The bench waited outside, the sign tilted just so, the hydrangeas busy with their blue. The porch had found its voice. Tomorrow would have its say. For tonight yes was enough. Monday put sunlight in a dress and hung it on the porch. The little sign Emily painted swung once and settled. The words looked right against the wood. Paper porch. I brewed coffee and opened the door so the house could smell like morning the way it did when Harold left for work, with a kiss and a joke about traffic that never changed. Leonard loaded his car with the quiet pride of a man who has chosen a better path and is willing to walk it without applause. A suitcase. A box of kitchen things. The shoebox of letters we had read on the bench. He handed me a slip of paper with his new address in careful print and asked if I would still bring a plant. I held up a spider plant already tucked into a pot and told him that plants and lists thrive almost anywhere. He smiled and said the apartment had a window that caught afternoon light and that he wanted the plant to learn his habits. We drove across town past brick buildings that remember their own names. The stairwell smelled like clean floors and someone else's cooking and hope. The apartment had pale walls and a small balcony just wide enough for a chair and a shoe mat. I placed the plant on the sill and taped a small card to the inside of the cupboard that said, "Rinse your plate, hang your towel, call your mother even when you have nothing to say." He laughed and promised to follow at least 2 of the 3 instructions. I told him 2 would be enough on most days and that good men learn the 3rd in their own time. Back home the porch waited. Emily arrived with a bag of lemons and a notebook and the kind of patience that makes teenagers look older than their age. She tied her hair up and squeezed fruit into a pitcher while I folded napkins that once lived in drawers where evenings lingered. Mr. Hill leaned over the fence to report that the Orioles had returned to the Maple with the bossy confidence of committee chairs. Daisy crossed the lawn with a plate of cookies that tasted like church basements and summer afternoons. Cal slowed his truck and asked if we needed anything that came in a box with directions and a warning label. We told him the directions were simple and the warning was small. Be kind and tell the truth and bring a chair. Amanda texted near 4. She asked if the time we mentioned still worked. I wrote that it did. 10 minutes later she stepped onto the porch in a sweater the color of cream and held out the unused key like a truce. She looked smaller without an argument strapped to her back. We sat on the bench and the word sorry landed between us without trying to hide behind excuses. She said fear had dressed up as certainty and had driven the whole situation until it ran out of road. She said she had an appointment to talk about the way she holds on when letting go would help more. I told her I would not rehearse old scenes and that I forgave her because forgiveness is a tool and I like tools. I told her the house would not be a battlefield again. She nodded and said she understood and that she would try to earn a different kind of day. Leonard came around the side of the house carrying a folding chair that squeaked in a friendly way. He hugged Amanda the way people hug when they want peace more than victory. Emily poured lemonade into heavy glasses and the table took the weight without complaint. We passed the cookies and said small things on purpose. Weather. The choir concert. The way hydrangeas hold color as if the sky signed a contract with the soil. Nobody tried to narrate lessons. The porch did that job for us by being itself. When the glasses were empty and the cookies were reduced to crumbs, Amanda stood and placed the key on the little table near the door. She said thank you for letting her return something she should not have taken in spirit even if she had never used it. I told her returning is its own kind of courage and that I had been a teacher long enough to know the worth of starting over. She smiled like a person who has finally found a door with her own name on it and walked down the steps without looking back, which felt right. The street eased into evening. Children drew lines of chalk on the sidewalk and turned them into games without needing a meeting. A dog approved every passerby. The train stitched a long sentence across town and placed a soft period somewhere past the river. Leonard fixed the little squeak in the folding chair because he could not help himself. Emily practiced the word hallelujah under her breath until it fit in every corner of the porch. I went inside and brought out the folder that had carried us through the week. It felt lighter. I set it on the bench and opened it one last time. Nurse report. Bank letters. Clerk stamps. Motion and order. Emails and receipts. Photographs of rooms before and after. I touched each page and thanked it for doing its job. Then I closed the folder and slid it into the cabinet where I keep cookbooks and birthday candles and the scissors that know where they belong. Not hidden. Not on display. ready when needed and content to rest. Father Tom walked by on his way to see a parishioner and paused at the gate. He looked at the sign and laughed and said the words looked like a sermon written in wood. Build what matters. Keep what keeps you. Share the bench. He blessed the porch with a little cross of his hand and continued down the block. The air felt taller for a moment and then settled into ordinary, which is the blessing I had been craving all along. Dusk pressed its palm to the window and the hydrangeas turned the exact blue of a good night. Emily took a picture of the bench and the sign and the mirror by the door and said every story needs an ending you can point to. Leonard locked his new address into his phone with a seriousness that made me proud and made me want to hand him a medal and a slice of pie. I told him pie would have to do. He said pie would do just fine. When the porch lights clicked on, I asked for 5 minutes by myself. They went inside and left the door open so the house could listen. I sat on the bench and put both hands flat on the wood. I said thank you to the week that had tried to break me and then made me bigger. I said thank you to the straight lines that held. I said thank you to the quiet that did not mean surrender and to the papers that turned into a bridge. I said thank you to Harold for loving blue flowers and clean rules and the way a woman writes her life into a notebook without asking permission. I said thank you to the girl who kept her head and to the son who found his way back and to the neighbor who knew the names of birds that do not carry keys. Then I called everyone back out and we took a photo under the sign and each face looked like someone who had learned something without losing anything they could not afford to lose. We went inside for pie because celebration tastes better on plates. We washed dishes in easy rhythm and put everything where it belonged. If you stayed with me to the end, if you have sat on this porch in your mind and felt a door in your own life click open, do one brave thing before you go. Subscribe so we can keep each other company. Leave a comment and tell me where you are watching from and what straight line held you up this week. Share this with a friend who needs a reminder that boring can save a life. I will be here tomorrow with coffee and a pen and likely cake because cake helps. Come back and sit a while. We will read our lives out loud and count that as victory.